Hi, everybody, and welcome to a webinar. Just what you always wanted to do is spend a nice long period of time listening to me drone on about something. But this is the subject that is extremely important and one of the more in-demand topics that I get, which is just basic interviewing. It's like almost as much as people ask about the very unimportant topic of resumes, and I do mean unimportant, but that's another topic for another day. Interviewing, you got to do great. You have to. But I'm going to explain today that it isn't just enough to do great on the interview. It's critical to do well after the interview. So we're going to talk about why the after part of the interview is just as important. And we're also going to talk about some of the slightly different things you may want to do on an interview. Notice the title of this is Behavioral Interviewing, which is based on a technique that was designed by Design Dimensions International, a consulting company in the 80s. When I first learned about it, when I was at the Chase Bank, and it's a very complicated way of interviewing, and I thought it was impractical. But the essential pieces of it, the pieces where it had to do with prove what you say. If you just listen to that sentence and tattoo it on your brain for interviews, you don't have to listen to the rest of the hour. In other words, don't say, I know how to do something, and then don't follow it up with an example. That's what behavioral interviewing is about. So it was huge in the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. And then all of a sudden, I never heard about it anymore, except I kept using it and kept teaching it. And I used it when I was a recruiter at the Chase Bank. And then all of a sudden, about 4 years ago, I started hearing it all the time again, particularly at Amazon, which takes it to an almost fetishistic degree. They actually tell people about it before the interview and then say, here are 13 things that you need to prepare, which is a lot. That's not going to be my number, I promise you. But this is based on the idea of I won't say much without being able to prove it. So just keep that in your mind. And as we go through this, you'll see what I mean. Here are the ideas that we're going to cover today. One of the things that I have said for years in my career is when you're teaching or doing a presentation, don't read the slides to the people. They know how to read. So I'm assuming you're reading. You can see what we're going to cover today. And even if you don't, you'll still get it. So it doesn't matter that much. So this is our agenda. Let's just dive right in. And this is the psychological aspect of interviewing. The psychological aspect is this is not a performance. This particular idea, it's a conversation, not a test. Hey, I just read a slide. It's a conversation, not a test, was brought to my attention by someone who was working with me at the time. And this is a good 20 years ago, was working with me at Columbia Business School. And she was saying, you got to stick in a slide that gets people off this notion of, I have a presentation to make and I'm going to get it across come hell or high water. It's not that. It's a half and half deal. It's you're talking, they're listening, they're talking, you're listening. It is a conversation. It is not a performance, or I even wrote up here, it's not a test, which, I want to take the pressure off. So you have to go in with that mindset. You also need to go in with the mindset of, even if I'm nervous about this, a lot of people talk about the anxiety of interviews. And I'm going to say, it doesn't matter that you're nervous. Everybody's nervous about an interview. The preparation we're going to talk about is going to get rid of most of that anxiety. But then there's that inherent anxiety that a lot of people have. I would say a majority of people have. And I'm going to tell you something that is going to be frighteningly superficial. Please do not misinterpret me as being that person. But by superficial, I mean, it really matters much more about how you sound and how you look. It isn't really that much about content, even though we're going to stress content because the content has to be good. It's really about shoulders back, confidence, eye contact, some gesturing, smiling, sense of humor. It's the packaging that really makes the big difference on an interview. And then the rest of it is the substance of it. And that's what you're going to spend most of your time preparing. So first thing we got to do. Now we're talking nothing but preparation right now. Know the company. I have heard over and over and over that recruiters and interviewers will complain that the applicant doesn't know much about us. It seems like this canned performance that I'm going to go in and say, here's all the great stuff that I've done. Here's all the terrific accomplishments I want to enumerate for you. Here's how terrific I am. And they're not paying attention to A, the person who they're talking with, or they're not paying attention to the company. So I'm telling you, all this obvious stuff that you've heard a million times before, but sometimes don't do, i.e. 5 items that you need to find out about the company. My favorite database, if you have access to it, is Factiva, because you can really get it all off there, but there are many other ways. Don't depend on Google so much, because you don't always know how current a Google entry is. So I'm going to suggest Factiva, which is a terrific. If you have the great good fortune of getting to a Bloomberg machine, that too would be a great idea. But you can also learn a lot from Hoover's or Standard & Poor or Dun & Bradstreet. Again, my favorite is Factiva. Why? Because they put précis of other media articles about the organization. So you don't just get what the organization wants you to know, you get what other people say. You want to see what does Fortune say? What does Wall Street Journal say? What does Business Week say? Bloomberg Business Week. What do they say? And you want to know that, and you want to be able to reflect it during the interview. We have a specific place for that a little bit later on, but you may work it in. So here are all the items that you want to know about. My favorite one, the most important one to me, is the fourth, the current events one, where you know what's going on in the company now, and then you get to say to them, by the way, I read, this is if they're asking you if you've had any questions. By the way, I'm thinking that I just read that you were planning an expansion in the Southwest, and you're going up against XYZ company, and they've had a lock on the product there. I'm curious if you'd be willing to share with me how you're going to be able to tackle a very tough market that is already very penetrated. Boy, is that dazzling. It's so great when you let them know you've taken the trouble to do your homework. I think it makes a huge difference in a resume. I think it's almost as important as anything we could talk about for the rest of this time today. Then you got to know what you know. You have to prepare. And I'm going to talk about a specific method of preparing. Like, here are some great skills. Some of them not so great. Some of them may not be the ones you want to talk about. For example, I don't like talking about these skills in an interview unless you're being asked, and then you can provide a specific concrete example, because a lot of these are subjective. Like, I'm a great team player, and I wrote the worst, because when somebody says they're a team player, I don't know what it means. And how do you prove it? You can, if you've really worked hard in your preparation, but it's like such a, I don't know, it's a revolting, it's a cliche. It's the best way to describe it. Or, I have great interpersonal skills. You better be prepared to talk about specific ways that you have interpersonal skills and what effect it's had on jobs that you've had. So I don't love using these as the skills you're preparing to talk about. I like these kinds of skills, which are way more specific. So we have 4 here. I mean, there are hundreds more. And then, does it have to be on current jobs? What if you're 23 and you've had a year of experience? can I use projects that I've done in school? If I just got out of business school or another graduate program, can I use some giant project that, yeah, of course you can. Or can I use them from internships? Yeah. Can I do it from volunteer work? Yeah, as long as it's applicable to maybe one of these 4 or one of the other 10 that you can come up with. All I want you to do is be able to come up with 3. And what you want to do is come up with 3. If you've had the good fortune of seeing a job description, you boil it down to what do they want? Or if you don't, and you just know the title of the job or one thing about the company, then you have to take a guess. What do they want? And boil it down to 3 different things, maybe 2, but I like 3. What do they want from me? And then we have to prove it. We have to prove it by what I call war stories. That's why the graphic is war from Black Panther, I believe. They're usually called, at least in places where I've consulted, called cars. Sometimes there was one outplacement firm that I used to know that actually called them SARS, which is no laughing matter today, but it was pretty funny back then because that's when they published this and they had to redo the entire literature of the company. They meant situation, action, result, but it was SARS. We're going to call them cars. And these cars are going to illustrate those 3 areas that you boiled down that you think the prospective employer is going to want. So each story, war story or car that you're going to prepare is going to have 3 elements. And it's not going to go over 2 minutes, by the way. You go over 2 minutes or over 3 minutes, you're going to lose someone. Let's say it's in the first 10 minutes of the interview and they ask you a question about some accomplishment that you've had and you're going on and on and on and on and on. Now, keep it clipped and use these 3 elements. I think the action is the most important one. Action actually implies skill, because if you're doing something, that means you know how to do it. And that's what's important. Result. A lot of people that I explain this to get very upset with the idea of results because they think it has to be numbers, and maybe they're working in a nonprofit in a non-financial role, and they can't talk about numbers like this resulted in a $1 billion sale, but it can result in, the result of this was an increased exposure to our target population. We were able to get to this, and that. So, or we reduced operational time on the product by 30%. So it's when you can use numbers, great, but you don't have to. And I don't want you to be telling stories where people end up saying, so what? Telling a job description on a resume or telling a job description in an interview screams for the response, so what? Because you haven't told what it accomplished for the organization. So that's the really critical part of behavioral interview. This slide, this is it, which is I've chosen 3 skill areas. And now I'm going to prove them. And I'm going to recommend you go into every interview you ever go into with at least 5 or 6 cars or war stories prepared, ready to go. So you've done 2 major things now. We're reviewing a little. Number 1, we have talked about preparing for the interview by knowing the company and preparing the interview by having examples prepared. So we're ready for the interview now. All set? Okay, we move on. The first 5 minutes, most people will say, ask any corporate recruiter or executive search person or decision maker who hires a lot of people, or somebody like me who meets millions of people going on interviews. First 5 minutes can make or break the interview. I'm going to say that it breaks more often than it makes, because making means, okay, this person's okay. And now we'll spend the rest of the interviewing confirming what I believed from the first 5 minutes. But if it's a break, i.e., like this on the body language, you're not making eye contact, your handshake is the wet fish. If you have a bad handshake, give up your career now. Forget it. And I'm specifically aiming for women right now about this subject, because when I was growing up in the 1920s or whenever it was, when I was growing up, women usually just offered a hand, like of a limp hand, and that was a handshake. That's changed in the last 20, 30 years in business, that handshakes for men and women are the same. But every now and then I will meet, sometimes it's an international issue where it's not part of a culture from another country, or it's a feminist issue, which is didn't give the firm handshake. And man, when I get it from a guy and get the wet noodle, forget it. It's like, I don't know. It's like there's something about it that makes me think that the person isn't solid. I know this is dumb and it's a dumb way to judge. Just have a great handshake. Be able to do a little small talk. You see a photograph on the desk, or if you're doing it via Zoom, which of course you're doing it right now, here in 2021, you're doing it by Zoom, and you see something, you see a picture or something, or a family photograph, and ask, is that your family? That kid is cute. God, how old? Just, minor little thing that you can do. Energy and passion. Of this list, I think this is the most important item. Nobody wants to hire somebody who's looking scared and isn't doing the great performance that we alluded to earlier. It isn't showing energy and excitement and they're just showing anxiety, or they're showing extreme introversion. And if you're an extreme introvert, you have to get your performance up to par. You've got to not behave like the person who doesn't really like doing this, or doesn't like self-marketing, or doesn't like any of it. Energy and passion can cover a whole multitude of problems, because people like it. They want to know you're really thrilled by them. They want to know that you like the idea. And then last but hardly least, in the first 5 minutes is going to be the pitch, which we're going to get to into some depth, which is, tell me about yourself, or let's run through your background, or the dumbest version of that, which is, let's run through your resume. Like, who cares what you did 10 years ago? That question, let's run through your resume, is the classic bad human resources question. I can trash human resources people because I was one a while ago when I was in corporate recruiting. And so I can make fun of them. And that is one of the worst questions. Like, run through your resume. I really only care about the last job and maybe the one before it. And maybe there was one at the beginning 15 years ago, because I worked there and I want to ask you questions about that. But really, we don't need to run through the resume, not the whole thing. And I certainly don't care about your extracurricular activities in college. I don't want to talk about it. I don't even want it on your resume. So the pitch. These are the various, see, I got that walk me through your resume on there. These are the various kinds of opening questions that are going to be, to me, by far the most important part of the interview, by far the critical piece of an entire marketing campaign for career transition. It's great for introducing yourself to a stranger via email. It's great for following up to a networking meeting. It's especially good in terms of following up to an interview and answering this question. Tell me about yourself. So we're going to spend a little more time on this first question of a few that we're going to review, because it is so important. So I'm going to mention quickly, I'm not going to go through a whole class on pitch, but I want to talk about the 5 elements of pitch. And here they are. Briefly, the first one, you can't say, I'm a general manager. Well, what does that mean? General manager of what? Or I'm a leader, or I'm an executive. Shy away from executive, please, because it's like too often it gets misinterpreted as you're going to be hugely expensive. You might be hugely expensive. That's good. But Do we want to talk about it this soon? Do we want to scare people away? No, we don't. So the labeling and positioning statement is either I am a, make sure you give them something that you really are. It's not your job title. It's what you call yourself. Make sure you give that if you can, so that they know and can focus on what you are immediately. Okay, so it's important that you have a label, but what if you can't? What if you're making a radical change? Like many of the executive MBA students that I've worked with in 5 or 6 different universities over the years, they're frequently making radical changes. And so are so many of my private clients in my private practice. They don't want to call themselves an accountant because they're making a move and they don't want to get pigeonholed. So the positioning statement, what I'm seeking to do is combining my background in this plus my interest and training and some experience in that so that I can be that. In other words, a logical positioning statement that is not a stretch. And if you have trouble with that, you need to get some help on this. This is tricky, which is what do I want to be? But you don't want to say I want to be. It's I am a combination of. I hope I was clear about that. The second, prove it. Whatever it is that you said, prove it. So 2 or 3 skills or experiences, a sentence each. That's it. You'll say, as an accountant, if I was an accountant, I had excellent Excel skills, was able to, I can work on a spreadsheet in any imaginable way, and my skills are fairly advanced. That's one. You can come up with 2 or 3 things that back it up. Maybe you have something really sexy in there, and one experience where you helped the company land a $500 million deal. And so you want to mention the number. And so maybe that third one, you go to 2 sentences or 3 sentences. This number 2 is the meat and potatoes of your pitch. This is going to be 75, 80% of your pitch. Well, 75, 80% of 120 seconds or less. So this is important. Now, unique selling proposition. For those of you who are in advertising, you know what that is. For the rest of the world, what is it? The question is, what makes me different? But the word unique is not really that easy to use. So I changed it, even though I like unique selling proposition because it's a real business term. Unusual selling proposition. So you're not saying I'm the only person who has that, which is what unique means. Unusual selling proposition is usually, not only have I worked in the back office, but I've also had considerable dealings with the front side of things. Something that gives you something that they may be looking for and that separates you from the rest of the pack. Like a combination of skills. Like I've done this side and that side, or I've done not only the development of it, but I've also done the implementation of it. I was the idea guy, the strategy guy, and then I did this. So that you got to have something unusual. You want people to walk away with something. Then the fourth one, this is what most people think a pitch is like, where did I work? And you know what the worst thing you can do in a pitch? What most people do. And then I did this, and then I did that. And I was working on the farm and I was shoveling horse manure. And the outcome was we had a great stock of fertilizer and we did great crops. And you tell this long, boring story that has no relevance to the job that you're talking about. It's not where you worked necessarily. It's what the place means in terms of your branding. So if you worked in a place that has a big brand, now I'll always use Chase Bank because it's my name. And it really assures me that people are going to remember me, the guy from Chase who worked at Chase, like that. So I like using that as a brand. And if you have a great brand, use it. So I've worked in a variety of settings, ranging from the Chase Manhattan Bank, which is what it was called when I was there, then to the world's largest outplacement firm. Because I'm not going to use the name of the outplacement firm. I'm not going to assume that everybody knows who they are. So you sometimes talk about the company as a function, sometimes with the name, and this should be very short. This should be a sentence, 2 max. But most people think that that's what everyone wants to hear. I don't think it's so important. I think number 2 is what they want to hear. Number 1 is what they want to hear. 3 is what they want to hear. Settings is good. We want to show that we've had jobs. We also would like a little branding. I worked at Deloitte, that's great. Use it. It means something. The 5th one is the one that for some reason I've gotten a lot of misunderstanding of this. This is an advertisement. This is a less than 2-minute advertisement. So you're going through these steps, not necessarily the way I say them, but I just think these are the key ingredients. The summation is like an ad. It's not I'm adding something, it's that I'm summarizing everything that I've already said. So it's in essence, I'm a person who can deliver da, da, and da. But you say it in different words from the ones you said before, which is what a commercial would do, which is let's make sure that our viewer, our listener, is understanding exactly what I am. So I'm going to say it in as many different ways as I possibly can. There's your pitch. Hardest thing, really one of the hardest things to do in all of career transition, because how do I get my whole story and brand together in 2 minutes or less? Critical. So we have some more though. We've got a lot more. Here are the basic 5 interview questions. We've already taken care of number 1, and we've also taken care of most of number 3, but I'd like to run through these because if you can answer these 5, you're going to be great. You are going to be able to do well on the interview if you get in your cars, at least 2 or 3 of them, and if you get in some questions that reflect that you did your homework, and then the rest of what we're about to talk about. So we've done number 1. Now we're on question 2. Why did you leave your last job, or why are you looking for a job? I love making this into a commandment, thou shalt not trash thy former employer. Please do not trash thy former employer, because the perception will be not that you're a complainer necessarily, but that you're a malcontent, that you're the reason that the last employer was such a terrible place to work. You never say anything negative about a former employer because it makes you look bad. So what you want to say, and don't say because I wanted a challenge, because that's the implication is you're going to leave this job too the second you get bored. So what you want to say is something. I'll give you a couple of examples. Like I went as far as I possibly could. My boss is my age, and she is not going anywhere. I don't see any upward mobility, and I'm not ready at this point in my career to stay happy where I am. Like the job a lot. You always like the job a lot. You liked everything you've ever done in your life. Sunshine, happiness, and success all the way. So you loved everything, but I wanted to be able to continue an upward trajectory in my career. Or the entire unit was downsized. So that doesn't make you look bad if a unit was. If you were downsized and there were perfectly logical reason for it, you don't want to draw attention to it. You never want to say they reorged my job. No. So you're going to have to work on this. This is a tough one if there's a negative going on, if you were terminated for performance reasons or because you and your boss hated each other, which is the usual one. It always has to appear like this is all part of my grand strategy, my plan. My plan is to move forward in the field as much as I possibly can. I feel good about that. You feel good about everything, by the way. There's no negative on an interview. You know that, right? Everybody know that? All right, this is question 3. Why should we hire you? So the question really is, what do you know about modeling? Or give me an example of something that you did in creating a marketing plan from scratch for a new product. So it's all the skills questions. And this is where you're going to get those cars in. You're going to use what I call here the art of the segue. And for the non-musicians among us, a segue is a transition. There's a transition between parts of a musical piece. Here, the segue is if you're being asked a question, what you would like to do is be able to segue it to a car that you've prepared. If you can, you can't always do that. But if you want to get to the war story, let's say they ask you some kind of dumb question like, who's the best boss you ever had? And you give one sentence, no more because they're going to want to hire the boss, but one sentence about how great that boss was because she taught you how to, and give a skill, and then you're often running into a war story. Maybe it's about delegation, maybe it's managing people, maybe it's how to do a new kind of a marketing plan in an old style firm, and you're using social media for the first time, and you give an example about that. The art of the segue is, can I leverage the question I'm being asked, which is kind of irrelevant, into something I want to talk about? This is the key to the interview. You want to be able to get at least 2 or 3 war stories in there, even though I've asked you to prepare for at least 6. You're going to go in with 2 or 3. You want to get 2 or 3 in there. So you want people to walk away from the interview and say, wow, she was really sharp and fun. And she also knows how to do this, and she knows how to do that. What we don't want is there to walk away and say, nice guy, really had fun talking to him, but they're not quite remembering what it is that you know how to do. So you've got to get those war stories in, got to get those cars into the interview somehow, some way or another. Successful interview, to me, that's one of the lead issues, which is, did I get a couple of cars in there, 2 or 3 of them? So that's question 3, except question 3 has a downside to it. So I have 3A, this is 3B. The subtext of it, and you can see we're doing subtext. What are they really asking? It's a trap question. Whenever you answer a real weakness question honestly, think about it. They're going to go after you on that question. They're going to want to talk about it. So you always have to go into the interview with, as I said 2 minutes ago, there are no weaknesses. There are no negatives, except you can't say that because it makes you sound ridiculous. So what I mean here about shooting yourself in the foot is, I've had people when I've done mock interviews on video and I asked them, what are your weaknesses? And I remember one guy, this is a long time ago, but I can't forget it. He said, I have a great deal of difficulty being patient with subordinates when they can't catch on as fast as I do. So I said on video for him to see later, so you're announcing to me that you're a lousy manager because you're impatient with somebody learning something and you only like people who are as fast as you are? That does not make you a great situational manager at all. That's shooting yourself in the foot. That's answering too honestly. I don't want honesty about your weaknesses. What I want is you to pick up something 5 years ago, like when you were first managing one person and you had trouble delegating and how you solved the problem. That's an easy one. Or in the past, when a new technology was implemented in the company and you're not a technologically oriented person, well, how did I learn how to make this a strength? Not be so terrified, and how did I learn how to embrace it rather than to fight it, which is what most people do when they're presented with new technology or some new system when the old one was working fine for them. So you take an example of something a while ago, because we want a little distance between you and it, that you fixed and has now become a strength. Be prepared with that one. It's always good not to wing that one. Question 4. This is almost as stupid a question as what are your weaknesses? And this one, the what are your weaknesses, you're going to get asked mostly if you're young, but no one's really interested in your weaknesses. They just want to see if you have some that are going to keep you from discharging your duties on a new job. This one, is anybody really interested in what your ambition is? Seriously. Maybe in the fifth round or fourth round of interviewing, because there's so many rounds these days, maybe in later on, they just ask you as a nature of things, but I'm going to give you a set way to answer this question so you can't hurt yourself. Understanding that no one's really caring where you want to be in 5 years. So what you always want to get across is, I've had a plan for several years. As a matter of fact, I knew in high school that I was a math guy. I knew it. I mean, I took AP calculus in my junior year. I loved it so much. And I knew that it was going to be some kind of business having to do with a mathematical basis to it. So I first started getting into deals and creating models, and I loved it. I loved that in B school. And now I'm working on logarithms and, for payment systems and working on all of that. And it's been such a logical progression that I can't see myself doing much more. I want to learn more pieces of it, and I want to rise within an organization, but I'm pretty set on what the career direction is. People want to know that you're stable. And of course you're not. None of us is in terms of career. I mean, you know what the average length of a job is in 2021. It's about 3 years. And people, I think the stats show that you're going to have 12 jobs in your career and 3 different careers. So, I mean, expecting this consistency thing is kind of silly, but you're going to give into it. People still talk about it. How many people do you know who have stuck with the original career concept, aside from unhappy lawyers who can't figure out how to get out of what they're doing, or investment bankers, or a number of other professions where you make the commitment really early and you stay with it? How many people do we know like that? I don't know. I have very few friends who were at 22 doing the same thing that they're doing now at 98. So you don't want to ever say also something about, I hope to gain such and such a skill here, and then go off and consult. I actually did have a client on camera say that, which is terrible. Right? So I threw that in there. Then we have question 5, a whole other class, a whole other webinar. Go on my website. I've got it on the videos page. I've got a full webinar on salary negotiations. I only want to talk about it in case it comes up in an initial interview, which it shouldn't. Good interviewers don't do that. HR people will do it because it's a screen, but that's why I want you to avoid HR people until the end, which means do your search via networking and relationships and get to decision makers, and then HR for the last interview, the walking and talking and chewing gum at the same time interview, like I know it. Bottom line here is, if the number comes up, the second that anybody mentions number, even if it's a phone screen, the second is you want to avoid the subject. That's all I'm telling you right now. And I'll give you one answer for now, and then you can check that out in a negotiation workshop. But the basic thing is to say, I really hate to eliminate myself because of a dollar figure. Right now, the most important thing for me is fit. I'm looking for the great fit, for the great career fit between my skills and experience and what you need. And if that works, I'm sure we'll make the money work. To me, that's the number one issue, fit. So if it's okay with you, could we defer this until we figure out whether there's a great fit? Now, some people will not accept that. Check out the class on that one. And I have 2 other ways of answering that question as well. Bottom line, no, again, I'm using bottom line because we're talking negotiations. I don't want you talking about money. I want you to put it off as long as possible, because the longer you put it off, the more you're going to make. The longer you put it off, the more you drive your competition away. Okay, those were the 5 questions. Now, remember I said this is a conversation, not a test at the very beginning, first slide. You know what that really is? I don't know if anybody remembers or has studied active listening. And if not, if you're working in an organization that has a lot of good learning and development, always take a class on active listening. It's critical. It's a key to success in business, but it's also consultative selling. Consultative selling, a very popular concept many years ago, also known as spin selling, which is the idea of I'm listening to what the interviewer is asking me, and then I'm spinning it back. I'm going to give that person what they want. So I'm a great active listener. I'm taking in whatever anybody is saying to me, and then I'm going to give it back to them. Not, I'm going to just stick to my own agenda come hell or high water. So that's why I have to stick in this notion right here. If you're not listening, and this goes for networking too, and relationship building too. If you're not listening actively, then you are not prepared to give people what they want, which is selling. You're selling yourself, and you're selling to what they need and what they want. When somebody says to you, I wonder if you have any questions. We've been talking a long time now, and I've already mentioned this, but I can't let go of this topic. This is going to reflect that you've done the homework. So we talked about this already when I said about the Southwest and the expansion of the territory. So it's something, maybe you have a couple of questions based on your research of that organization, which is showing off that I do my homework. I am prepared for you, and I understand what you are all about. So sorry to have pounded this point, but I think it's really important. You know how awkward the last 30 seconds of an interview are? Seconds are, yeah. How awkward. You get up, nobody's saying anything, and you say, well, it was nice to meet you, and you walk out. You know what? A good thing would be is when you're getting up, and let's see, these days, if it's a live interview, which is not going to happen very much, we don't shake hands anymore. I don't think people are going to ever shake hands again. Or take subways for that matter. You're gonna just basically smile and say, it was great to meet you. Then it's gotta be one last minor pitch, which is gonna be, I don't know how you felt, and I guess I'll find out, but I saw this as a great fit. I see that you're looking for this, this, and that, and I'm presenting this, this, and that, and I'm really looking forward to next steps. Some people will take that a step further and say, could you give me an idea of what your time frame is and what the plan is on moving forward in general? That's a good way to end an interview. Remember I said very early on that following up is almost as important as the interview itself, maybe more so. One of the things I learned when I was doing corporate recruiting in a time when I didn't get a lot of follow-up emails, and I know I was the recruiter, the corporate recruiter, not as important as the decision maker, but still you got to include everybody who interviewed you. And every time I would get an actual follow-up, I remembered the person because it was 1 out of 50. Always remembered that person. Now everybody does it, but they don't do the right thing. You see the little thank you note there? That's misleading, and that's deliberate. It's not an etiquette thing. Even though there is a little etiquette involved, it is not about thanks for your time. I really appreciate that you gave me so much of your valuable time. Why would you say that? That's their job. But you can say thank you for your time. What you really want to do is make this a marketing question. And again, you're going to say, I'm thinking from what I picked up that this seems to be a good fit, at least from where I sit. and make a list, make some bullets, and talk about how you match up with the things that they care about. This is a marketing email. This is not just a perfunctory thank you. You also may want to stick in that interview, maybe you forgot something. So you can say, by the way, I didn't get a chance to mention that I've had some considerable experience doing blah, blah, and blah. So you're adding something. How great is that? Do it. Quid pro quo. If there's anything I can do between now and the next to help you out or to make your decision easier, I love that line, please let me know. In networking, the quid pro quo is if there's anything I can do to repay the favor, please do not hesitate to call on me. You always want it to be a re-emphasis of this was the two of us. This wasn't just me. Two of us. I look forward to next steps and look forward to talking with you again, keeping it open. You expect it, you don't say I expect it, but you imply that you expect this to move along because, your wit, charm, and beauty. Come on, it's going to happen. While we're looking at my self-promotion here, these are my two books. I'll say one word about them, but I want to talk about a philosophy to close with. The first one, In Search of the Fun Forever Job, is a book I wrote specifically in response to people who don't like reading 1,000-page career management books like the Parachute book, which is, I think, 1,000,000 pages long. And in my humble opinion, he made millions on it. I respect that. I have not made millions, but the Parachute book is unreadable, at least in my opinion. And I've met very, very few people who have finished it. There are some other good books in the field. Most of them are too long. I specifically wrote this for people to just get to the point. Shut up and just show me how to do it. That's what the Fun Forever Job is. The networking book, which is only an ebook, the first one is in print and an e. The ebook is an expansion of the networking chapter because a lot of people asked me, can you give us more? Can you give us more? Can you give us more? So these are the two. And I'm welcoming you to my website where there are lots of videos, lots of blogs and articles on all the subjects you might be interested in. And they're there. Go, take, have fun. I want to end with a philosophy. And the philosophy is, ask not what the company can do for you. Rather, ask what you can do for the company. In other words, aside from the JFK paraphrase, in other words, don't focus on yourself during an interview. Your only goal is to get an offer. That's it. Get an offer. I want to keep this going. I want to knock out the competition. Even if you're not 100% sure about the job or whether you want it, keep it going. You may be able to negotiate something at the end if you get an offer. Get offers, and at the very least, you get to say no. And I got to tell you, saying no is just about one of the great things that you can possibly do. Seriously. You get so many rejections on a job search. That's part of the drill. How great is it for you to reject them? I'm all for it. I hope everybody gets the chance to do rejections of their own. But the philosophy is we shouldn't be focusing on what I want. We are focusing on what they want. The what I want comes into play after the offer is made. Then all of a sudden the balance of power shifts and you're the one in the power. You're the person who can start asking questions about what's in it for me. But up till that point, it's only about them and selling yourself towards what they want. I hope that you got what you needed here today. Tried to condense and try to get in as much factual material about behavioral interviewing. Good subject. Hope you get every single job that you interview for. Have a great day. Bye.